Do you actually pray for the systems that oppress you? It's really easy to just get frustrated and complain and gripe, but do you actually pray? I felt it as such a challenge when I was pondering the healthcare crisis in the U.S. Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang, and this is the Restore Healthcare Project. Love to have you here with me. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, and give us that 5-star review. I'm here thinking today about injustice again. And I think again about the disciples of Jesus and how similar we are to them. They had just come down from the Mount of Transfiguration. They had just seen this crazy supernatural moment of Jesus and their heroes of old appearing in front of them. And it was terrifying and wonderful. And they had a realization of who Jesus was, that he wasn't just a man, he was also God. And they had just seen so many miracles, and they had just seen deliverances, and they were arguing again about who would be the greatest. And there they are again at the Last Supper around the table. They'd spent all this time with him, and he was having this wonderful, holy moment that they'd prepared for, and they knew something was up. Things were happening. There was unsettledness, and there was also excitement, and there was also connection, and they were arguing again about who was going to be the best, who was going to be the greatest, who was going to be his right-hand man when he came and took down Rome. They looked like, after all this time, they still didn't get it. Gosh, these disciples of Jesus, they're literally getting to spend time with the most unselfish, gracious, sacrificially loving being of all time. And they're still trying to work out their position. Still self-promoting, still arguing, still undercutting, still ungrateful, still so irritating. I would never do that. It makes me think of so many in the world, and probably so many of us in the world, as we responded in December 2024 to the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, gunned down on the streets of Manhattan. It brought into the light all of our worst tendencies. It didn't just expose the injustice that has been perpetuated in the United Healthcare Corporation or in other commercial health insurance and in the industry and in the healthcare system itself. It brought something out in us. And yeah, we're the same, as it turns out, as the disciples. It's like a human problem that has existed since the beginning. And the Bible tells us why it exists within us. We all do have this innate tendency to self-promote, to be self-righteous, and to fight like hell to protect ourselves. Our tendency to misidentify our enemy and God's purposes caused a whole group of people that he was training some mental instability as they had to wrestle with and work through how God's way of thinking and strategizing to meet the needs of our world are so different from ours. And the problem that we think is the problem is not exactly right. And this has begun in us. The Bible tells us that this began in us from the very outset of the world, when our forebears, Adam and Eve, made the choice, having been deceived, that God wasn't protecting their best interests. They made a choice to choose a different way. And we have lived with this inborn tendency since then, human generation after human generation, and we are no different today. And also, those same voices of deception that oppose God still oppose us and still are at work in our world today to deceive, to distort, and to confuse in order to hide God's purposes from us and cause us to misidentify our enemy and be ineffective in our destiny. The problem is not Rome. The structures and the governments of people are often very broken all over the world and sometimes oppressive. And it's understandable that they look like the problem. It's so easy for us to incorrectly identify the problem as those structures around us that are daily causing us frustration or pain or that sense of injustice. But the Bible actually teaches, and Jesus taught while he was with us, that in fact, actually, those things that look like they're the problem are constructs of the mindsets that people live in, the thought patterns and the belief systems that they live in that were not created by people, but were created by dark spiritual forces that oppose God. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly place." Our problem, our enemy, is not actually people, unless we want to admit that the problem is within us. But our enemy, these mindsets that create the structure that breaks our systems and our culture, are set in place by Satan and the evil malicious spirits that work with him, opposing God, opposing everything that has to do with God. And so that, of course, includes anyone who is designed and created to manifest, to make visible who God is, humans. And their main power is in us giving them power by believing their story and giving away our authority by partnering with it. The source of the corrupted thinking might differ in system to system. So we may actually, in our American healthcare system, be very aware right now of a problem of a mindset of greed. And perhaps that's different from the healthcare system in the UK. Maybe greed isn't the predominant way of thinking that has created a mindset for people in the UK healthcare system. In the National Health Service, maybe it's something different. Maybe it's a sense of the poverty mindset, that there's not enough. And that mindset creates deceptions about how resources can be utilized. So it's different, but the enemy is the same. And the forces that create those ways of thinking and deceive and draw in humans to actually incorporate those ways of thinking in their own mind into belief systems, those are spiritual. And so the problem is not people. It is ultimately the dark forces that oppose God. Our healthcare systems need reform and restoration. It has been more apparent than ever in our current climate. Justice is needed. And am I saying that we shouldn't be working to change policies and seek accountability, legislate protections, build new systems, innovate into more righteous culture? Am I saying that? It's just, the problem is a spiritual force problem. So there's no need to do anything visible. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that if we don't recognize that what we're up against is not just the visible culture and oppression around us, it's the mindsets, it's the strongholds, the fortresses of thinking that our enemy has actually helped us to create. Those come from dark spiritual places. And that is at the root of the constructs that are broken. Until we deal with those and have a spiritual solution to those things, our work is going to be very onerous and ineffective. We need to address the source power that actually energizes the mindsets in our culture that people get stuck in and then act out of. Why in the US do diabetic insulin and asthma steroid inhalers cost so much? Somebody asked me that this week. Why is this so astronomically priced? There's no way that these generic, highly needed, essential medications should cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Why is Big Pharma so horribly greedy? Who fueled that? Who in Big Pharma? Who do we blame for this? Who are we going to single out to blame for this? And I'll say it again. I know we think who the good guys and the bad guys are in this story, and we get it wrong all the time. Paul said, our enemy is not flesh and blood. Our enemy is not people. People are the victims of our real enemy, the enemy who opposes our identity and destiny because the enemy opposes God. You may not have a construct for this in your worldview. You may not understand there is a spiritual realm that opposes God. But if you leave this out of your worldview, you're going to be very confused about what you see going on in the world and why humans and systems behave the way that they do. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not wage battle according to the flesh, meaning the physical realm. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying arguments and all arrogance raised against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Paul is not actually talking about a physical war with physical weapons against people. And you may have noticed over history that followers of Jesus or Christians or religious followers of the way of Jesus got that wrong a few times. And it is so easy to do. I understand it. The enemy is not people. People are influenced and act out and cause harm, but they themselves have found themselves within fortresses. And Paul actually very clearly identifies what these fortresses are. They're patterns of thinking. He says we're actually working against arguments in the mind and arrogance that comes to oppose the ways of God. And we are taking those thoughts captive. Well, that sounds easy. It's actually, we have had more research into mindsets and how they affect people's health in the last decade or so that it just serves to really bolster what the Apostle Paul had learned from Christ 2,000 years ago. That actually, it's how we think and what we believe that produces our behavior, produces our problems, produces our disease. Very, very often. The way that we can go about this is not identifying these nameless villains and opposing them. We can't eradicate and shame everyone in Big Pharma. That's not going to fix the problem. Actually, are you kidding me? We need Big Pharma. I personally know brilliant researchers who work within Big Pharma, and they are responsible together for some of the most amazing innovations and breakthroughs for the most debilitating human diseases that no one ever dreamed we'd be able to figure out how to treat and cure. And they're in Big Pharma. Are they the problem? Are you going to oppose them? So many brilliant people, gifted by God, designed with the capacity to do great things, to eradicate darkness and disease in our world. That's God's heart. That's the mission of Jesus. So Big Pharma can't be our enemy. It can't be so. But people can't change until what they believe and think changes. That comes first. And so much psychology research has shown us that. That's why we have learned to believe that therapy and the process of therapy and the process of cognitive rewiring is so needed in order to help people out of these mindsets that torment them with mental illness and physical illness. Hey, Healthcare Tribe, I hope that you have been impacted by what I've brought through this podcast. I also want you to know about opportunities to give back through my nonprofit, Selah Health International. We work to support projects for women and children of vulnerable populations around the world. You can learn more and donate on our website, selahhealthinternational.org. Am I saying that we don't need legislators and healthcare justice warriors to take up the cause? I'm not. We do need our unjust systems to be deconstructed in some places. But we need to understand that as we do that, there is a way that Jesus modeled for us of doing that. And it identifies the real enemy first. I actually think that some of the advocacy groups that are springing up to help advocate for patients and for healthcare providers and for healthcare researchers and scientists actually are from the heart of God, and that there's pleasure of God on that, because God does want to see our pain answered. It was the point of Jesus. But if we only work on each of these problems, it's going to be a little bit like whack-a-mole if we're just trying to take down whatever it is that is your pet peeve, prior authorizations or insulin prices, or let's prosecute violations and fraud. And you're kind of just whacking the next problem. And we haven't changed what is influencing people to participate in that process, in that injustice, in that brokenness. The corruption is the result of people being stuck inside corrupted beliefs and thinking. And I believe it is a spiritual problem held in place by spiritual forces of darkness, and a spiritual problem needs a spiritual problem solution first. The power to overcome this has already been given to us, and we know that, and yet we don't know that by the way we live sometimes. It looks like we've forgotten. In Matthew 5, Jesus said, hey, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. He says the most confounding things, doesn't he? Like, no, pray for your enemies. Pray for your enemies, because when you do that, you look like your dad. You demonstrate his heart for people, because what you don't understand is your enemies are his loved creation, his people too. And his heart is that all things would be brought together with him and with each other. And so you reacting to people you think are your enemy doesn't actually bring forward what Jesus came to do. All of us have the opportunity to access new life and freedom because of the work of Jesus. Those who know him, those who don't yet. Our culture doesn't actually know how to fix the problems that are posed by enemies. And as soon as you fix one, God bless you if you're able to participate in that, a new one will arise. Because the problem is not the people. The problem is that there are mindsets and beliefs that oppose God, and they exist, and they need to be taken down. What will make us different if we are followers of Jesus? Jesus made it really clear. You're going to look confoundingly different. You won't live a lifestyle where you try to bring the kingdom of heaven by opposing the ones who seem to be instituting unrighteousness. You're going to bring the kingdom of heaven by praying for them, by blessing them, by seeing them as having a destiny from God to bring freedom to where they've been planted. When I was a medical resident, I was working, 80 to 100 hours. My husband was working to support the family, and he worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare, the enemies. And we used to joke all the time that he was working for the dark side. But he was enjoying his job, and he was a great healthcare analyst and strategic analyst, and he moved up in the ranks in these companies, and he enjoyed the strategies and the challenge of figuring out how to give better healthcare to people. He wasn't the enemy. He actually believed that within that system, he could have a positive impact for good. And it helped me to remember how easy it is to vilify some nameless entity and to forget all the people God has placed within it, who in a moment could find their destiny and live differently and bring something new and righteous into a system that's not righteous. It's not merely the oppression that we see in our day-to-day healthcare industry that we need freedom from. We need freedom in our minds, and the people around us need freedom in their minds too. We get to have this opportunity to actually share with our healthcare colleagues, with our patients, with our sphere, what God thinks about our healthcare world. And that should actually be something that's really felt as positive, because it's so different and so freeing. It actually has, God's thoughts have the ability to set us free from thoughts we can't get out of, beliefs that are harmful to us and to our system. If we offer alternative beliefs about what constitutes success, what constitutes performance, how does God see that? What has He taught us? What are our goals really? We get this opportunity to actually serve up good food, good thoughts, good ideas that come from our Father in heaven that we have learned from Him. This has the capacity to change on a deeper level our broken system. I would ask you to challenge your own thinking. Do you actually pray for the systems that oppress you? It's really easy to just get frustrated and complain and gripe, but do you actually pray? I felt it as such a challenge when I was pondering the healthcare crisis in the US and the recent blow up in United Healthcare. Do I pray for United Healthcare? Do I pray for their executives? Do I pray for the people within them, that their minds would be set free from deceptive thoughts that trigger greed and all sorts of unjust system propagation? What if they could actually hear the mind and heart of God? Because I would be willing to pray for them and bless them with that. Everything could change. We don't have to take people out. They just need to encounter something new. They need to encounter the freedom of the way that God thinks that can set them free from the patterns of thinking that Satan has set up for people. Are you one of the people in these systems? Have you just been grinding away at your job and you think it's kind of unfair that everybody vilifies you in your healthcare industry job? But did you realize that you are there as light and love, and your presence there should feel like good news to the people you work with? Do you realize that you have the authority to unite people for good? What would it be like if we blessed instead of cursed, as Jesus tried to get us to understand? Bless and do not curse. For me, one of the best manual documents for what does it look like to live transformed in your mind and to to give that away in your everyday life is from Romans 12. The whole chapter is fantastic about being transformed in your mind by the renewing of your mind. It's the prescription for root problems. And then Paul continues to outline in Romans 12 what that looks like. He talks about love must be sincere, free of hypocrisy, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves. You should spend a little time, if you would, reading through this chapter. He talks about blessing those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who are rejoicing, mourn with those who mourn. It's just very discreet, but beautiful language for this idea that actually we overcome mindsets by not repaying evil with evil, by not opposing people, but by in fact believing that they have the capacity to function as children of God as well. And our blessing has power and authority. It can actually be what it takes to set people free from thinking. I mean, there is nothing harder than trying to change somebody's mind. And yet, God does it all the time. He's done it for me. He's done it for many of you. He's able to, and he works through this crazy countercultural concept, bless, do not curse. I actually sometimes think about the social media posts I see from many who call themselves followers of Jesus. We do get pretty worked up over unrighteous things, and we like to let people know what we think about it. And we post and repost these criticisms and accusations against Big Pharma. And we perpetuate these conspiracies. We get ourselves worked up. We get other people worked up. In fact, many of the misconceptions and false ideas about healthcare, medicine, medical treatment, they're perpetuated by these kinds of messaging that we embrace. As soon as we start partnering with accusation, it just isn't how the kingdom of God works. That's a pattern that we only see from Satan, and it doesn't produce anything good. Are we overcoming evil with good, as Paul said in Romans 12? Why not post things about how you have hope for Big Pharma and what could happen if people within it shifted, were not always influenced by the needs and the greed of their investment partners, if they actually understood the power of generosity and realized that when generous, they actually succeed. It's a crazy principle of the kingdom of God. The Apostle Paul said in Romans 12, to cling to what is good. Like hold on to it with your fingernails and overcome evil with good. The good is everything that's detailed in Romans 12. We don't have to live always frustrated and upset in our healthcare industry. I believe we're actually going to see transformation as we begin to get it, that the root cause needs a spiritual solution. And we actually know who can bring that. We can listen to what the Holy Spirit teaches us. We can bravely bless. We can pray for those we think are struggling in the healthcare industry to bring their very best. The problem isn't Rome, and Jesus didn't come to destroy Rome. And I say this with a little wink because you all know history, that in fact, Rome did fall eventually. And more than likely, the followers of Jesus had a lot to do with the power of that system over people's minds and culture breaking. But he didn't do it in a military conquest. And it was one follower of Jesus at a time, being willing to bless and to pray and to serve, to be the good news that he came to bring. That gradually eroded the power of that system over people's minds and changed a culture, changed a system. God's answer to the problems that we are facing is to actually send us as ambassadors of a different way of thinking and as distributors of freedom for people's minds to think a new way. We can function in a new way, and we can break down dividing walls between us and them. Ultimately, that was the message of Jesus. I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang, and this is the Restore Healthcare Project. Hey, Healthcare Tribe. I hope that you've been impacted by what I've been able to bring through this podcast. I also want you to know about some opportunities to give back through my nonprofit, Selah Health International. We work to support projects for women and children of vulnerable populations around the world. You can learn more and donate on our website, selahhealthinternational.org.